is the stability of the internal environment of the body. It is not only the equilibrium of the internal environment but also the balance of composition and components of the environment and the physiological variables that influence environment. Abnormal deviation from these homeostatic processes leads to bodily dysfunctions. Feedback systems of the homeostatic regulations. Homeostatic regulation is mainly achieved through the feedback mechanisms that operate to safeguard a set of point already uh, to safeguard a set point already set for the physiological variable. There are two types of feedback regulations: negative feedback and positive feedback. So these are the some of the major electrolytes and body parameters which shows the normal range. They have to be maintained in a narrow range. For example, for sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphate, chloride, and bicarbonate. Negative feedback mechanism. The negative feedback mechanism is a usual mechanism of homeostatic regulation. When the variable is raised above the set point, the negative feedback mechanism triggers processes that inhibit the formation of the variable. When the variable is lowered below the set point, the negative feedback system withdraws the inhibition to allow the production of the variable. So this is uh, feedback mechanism of homeostatic regulation. Uh, any stimuli or stress, when it leads to disturbance in the body environment, so there will be change in some of the variables, so that activates the feedback mechanism. Okay, and by effect or response, so there can be inhibition or stimulation of the variable, so that helps in the return to the norm homeostasis, or failure of this can lead to dysfunction of the organ or the body. Components of negative feedback mechanism. Negative feedback control requires sensor that detects a change in the variable, a control center that receives input from the sensor and initiates command signal, and the effector that brings the responses according to the command signal directed from the control center. So this is showing components. So when there is a disruption in the homeostasis, so that will be detected by a sensor, and the signals go to the control center where there will be generation of the output signal. So that leads to the effect, I mean, which can be in a response. Okay, and that will help in return to the homeostasis. But meanwhile, the some of the responses, they will send signals to the control center to control the controller activity, and they in turn can inhibit uh, the sensitive feedback mechanism. In a positive feedback system, increase in a variable triggers process that further increase the variable. So this set of vicious cycle of activation of the process, this sets the vicious cycle of activation of the process. Therefore, this control mechanism does not operate to provide homeostasis. The positive feedback system, known as a vicious cycle system, that terminates only when stimulus applied to trigger is withdrawn or the process itself is self-terminated. The examples of positive feedback regulation are parturition reflex initiated by oxytocin. When head of the matured fetus presses on the uterine cervix, the cervical distension sends signals to release oxytocin, which increases the excitability of the myometrium and causes uterine contraction. So uh, this vicious cycle continues till the baby is delivered. Another example is LH surge. So this is increased luteinizing secretion that leads to ovulation. Normally estrogen inhibits LH secretion, but before ovulation, estrogen provides positive feedback to LH secretion, which results in LH surge, and this is responsible for ovulation. Another example is Hodgkin's cycle, the sodium influx that causes upstroke, that is depolarization of nerve or muscle uh, action potential. Opening of few sets of sodium channel provides positive feedback for the opening of other sodium channels, that is voltage gated sodium channels, results in massive sodium influx causing depolarization. Okay, so this is the example of a Hodgkin cycle. Okay, so when there is a threshold depolarization, there will be opening of the sodium channels. So opening of the set of sodium channels activate other sodium channels. So further sodium channels they open up. There is a rapid rise in the membrane potential. Okay, so that leads to depolarization. And also activation of the digestive enzymes. The activation of digestive enzymes pepsinogen and trypsinogen by pepsin and trypsin respectively. And the enzyme cascade hypothesis of coagulation, where activation of one clotting factor which acts as an enzyme to activate the next clotting factor in the coagulation cascade is also an example for